Hi, folks. Today's episode brought to you by your childhood. Well, not really. But you remember when you were a kid and you had those sugary cereals and you thought, I'm going to live forever, except for you didn't realize how much junk you were putting into your body? Well, Magic Spoon makes high-protein, zero-sugar cereals and treats, and they are completely reminiscent of your childhood cereals. Every serving of Magic Spoon high-protein cereal has 13 grams of protein, 0 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs. And they come in those flavors that you used to love when you were a kid, you wouldn't eat now when you're an adult because you don't want all that sugar. Fruity, cocoa, frosted. I'm partial to the cinnamon. Also, they've got these great new bars that are great for you. Feel good about giving them to your kids because they don't have all that sugar. They're crispy, they're crunchy, they're airy. They're easy ways to get 12 grams of protein on the go. They come in flavors like marshmallow, chocolate peanut butter, and dark chocolate. I'm hungry now.
Yeah.
Both are great on the go, pre or post-workout, or as a midnight snack. And like I say, also putting your kids' lunch. Get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/majority report, or look for Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. It's all over the place now. magicspoon.com/majority report gets you $5 off. Check it out. Now time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, September 8th, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Sarah Fouts, Associate Professor in the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the author of Rebuilding New Orleans, Immigrant Laborers, Street Food Vendors in the Post-Katrina Era. Also on the program today, with 22 days until a government shutdown, Schumer and Jeffries desperate to help Republicans help themselves. Meanwhile, Supreme Court, just breaking, allows Trump to fire an FTC commissioner against all precedent, really explicit precedent. Now, to be fair, it just blocks a ruling that blocks that firing. But of course, we know how that goes with the Supreme Court. And speaking of the FTC, remember during the Biden administration, the FTC found that non-compete clauses should be banned. Well, now the FTC drops the defense of that non-compete ban because populism. Ro Khanna says they have the congressional votes to introduce the Epstein Files legislation. Chicago braces for a federal military invasion. Florida Surgeon General brags he's done no research before removing school-required vaccine mandates.
Felt it in his gut.
Yep. In a rare ruling, the Israeli Supreme Court finds Israel guilty of having a systemic policy of starving what they call detainees Some people call them hostages. This on a day when Israel has killed near 50 civilians in Gaza. And as the economy craters, Scott Besson gets into a near physical altercation with Trump's housing finance chief / hatchet man. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. It is
Fun day Monday.
wow.
Yes, very fun.
You might want to get a little more onomatopoeia with that.
What's up?
Fun day. Oh, you're mad about the Giants.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. No, I do have a little
People
bit.
already, yeah. Okay.
I rushed back from the trip I was on, got up really early in the morning so we could make the drive, just so I could get back home in time for 1 p.m. kickoff. And yeah, that was not great. It was awful, atrocious. But congrats to Brian's Packers, who look like a real
20-0.
potential Super Bowl team.
Yeah, here we go. Exactly.
I'm
Us-
on the bandwagon.
Us basketball fans are like, whatever.
Wake me up when basketball starts.
Sox. I'll wait for the Sox Yankees series until I talk about sports again. Meanwhile, by that point, I don't think how that. Well, whatever. I know onomatopoeia should be like a word that sounds like it, as opposed to the way that you expressed it. But who cares? I don't care.
Whoopsie.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Your joke sucked.
It
Who
doesn't
cares?
matter in this environment. Yeah, exactly. In this,
move on.
listen, I've watched a lot of people do far better with much worse. So,
Like Rob Schneider.
exactly. We will get into maybe that little tussle that Scott Besson had. I imagine things are getting a little hairy for the Secretary of Treasury, because one can't help but think that A, he thought he was going to be Fed chair. It's quite clear he's not going to be Fed chair. He thought that he could probably convince Trump not to do the tariff thing and crash the economy for his buddies. It looks like that's not happening. Either way, it's going to be a crap show, because the tariffs are already taking their toll on inflation. The economy is stalled out. There's reason to believe that parts of the country are already in a recession. Even if the tariff thing was to be reversed ultimately by the courts, and you can't rely on the Supreme Court, the amount of money the U.S. government would have to then pay back to people, and by people, we're not talking about the people who paid the tariffs. It's probably going to go to Howard Lutnick's sons, who bought up a huge portion of all the potential tariff refunds. Besant gets into a fight with Trump's FHA hatchet man, who has been digging through the mortgage documents of Trump's enemies, found discrepancies in mortgage documents by one member of the Fed, mortgage documents she initiated and signed well before she was part of the Fed, as a way to get her to quit the Fed that Besant is no longer going to be a part of. And he gets into a big fight with him. I guess they got into each other's face. They were trying to take it outside to have a fight, but they didn't want to get hit by bags of stuff falling out of the window of the White House, apparently. And but at the heart of this is the economy is what appears to be doing, like, cratering.
Yeah.
And Besant is in the news saying things are going to turn around in a year. Like,
That was Letnick, but yes.
No.
Him too now?
No, Lutnick said that yesterday, and
This is just the
Besant-
talking point.
This is just this is what they're starting to talk about now, because.
Pie in the sky when you die.
But the interesting thing is like it's just now that we're starting to see like any reference to this in the economy, and now Besant, to his favor, says actually we're going to see the economy should accelerate by the fourth quarter. And
Oh, yeah.
presumably that's this year, fourth quarter.
Which is basically when every expert I've heard on this topic has said is going to be when the economy completely collapses, when inventory that has been accumulated in anticipation of the tariffs runs out, when holiday season comes around and the tariffs on China, where people will be buying toys for children, are going to be in effect. Even if the Trump is unable to prove the legality of his tariff regime by that's the October deadline, that doesn't have its effects like miraculously dissipate overnight ahead of Christmas and Hanukkah and all of that. It's going to be bad.
It's going to be bad. And someone's asking, I still don't understand how Ludnick's sons placed that bet. In financial markets, or just in finance in general, you can buy essentially the rights to something that is owed somebody. So this happens in bankruptcies all the time. Majority Report goes bankrupt. I still owe Brian money, and it's quite clear I'm not going to pay Brian, or at least Brian's not sure if he will. So I owe Brian $100. Obviously that's a half year's salary, and Brian's like, I don't know if I'm going to get this money. And if I do, I don't know when. And Matt comes along. He's savvy. And he says, Brian, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $50 or I'll give you $25 right now. And you walk away and you just give me the right to collect that loan. I'm going to bet that loan may come in. Maybe I'll only get 50 cents on the dollar, but I'll give you $25 today. Brian goes, you know what? I'm going to take that $25 now because I don't think I'm going to get anything out of Sam. And Matt waits to see if he gets anything out of me. In this instance, Brian is somebody who had to pay the tariffs. And if the tariffs are found illegal, gets a refund. Matt's coming in and going like, you may not get that refund. And this was like 3 or 4 months ago. But Matt, in this instance, is literally Howard Lutnick's sons at a subsidiary of Cantor Fitzgerald. They're buying up that $100 potential refund for $25, and they may end up seeing all $100. But even today, because of the court rulings, that refund that you bought, that right to refund you bought for $25 back in April, may be worth $50 today because it looks like there's a better shot of those refunds happening. Nevertheless, that is distinct, or at least the tariffs have been raising prices. But what's also happening is the economy is slowing because the tariffs are also harming the economy. And here is the CEO of McDonald's basically outlining, I think, a dynamic that's existed in this country for decades. But it is particularly pronounced now in terms of like the direction of economic fortunes for people across the income distribution.
And part of what we also saw was that, particularly with middle and lower income consumers, they're feeling under a lot of pressure right now. I think there's a lot of commentary about what's the state of the economy, how's it doing, and what we see is it's really kind of a two-tier economy. If you're upper income, earning over $100,000, things are good. Stock markets are near all-time highs. You're feeling, quite confident about things. You're seeing international travel. All those barometers of upper income consumers are doing quite well. What we see with middle and lower income consumers is actually a different story. It's that consumers under a lot of pressure. In our industry, traffic for lower income consumers is down double digits. And it's because people are either choosing to skip a meal. So we're seeing breakfast. People are actually skipping breakfast, or they're choosing to just eat at home. And so for our business, which has a significant group of consumers which are in that middle and lower income, we needed to step in with something like what we're doing here.
Now, I don't know what he's doing, maybe lowering prices, or I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about, but that dynamic is something that has been brewing since all of the COVID support ended, 2023 or so. And I think a large reason why the Biden administration and then the Harris campaign could not recognize what was happening in the economy is because we have really, like in many respects, two different economies. One that is driven by wealthy people and is large enough where we mistake it as including the other, like vast majority of people who actually like live in our society.
The divide is really between people who are making their money gambling on the stock market and who have assets, and people who don't have property or assets and need to survive on wages. And that's always been the case. But there has been an effort to kind of segment the working class and calling them middle class versus lower income or whatever. It's just everybody that needs a wage to survive and doesn't own property or doesn't own these assets are going to be impacted by this disproportionately. And it's why 10 out of the last 11 recessions started under Republican administrations. Just throwing that out there. And income and wealth inequality keeps getting worse and worse and worse. This is just so naked what they're doing right now, where they know that they have the funds to gamble and increase their wealth, and everybody else will have to deal with the increased prices. And Donald Trump is trying to bring all these corporations to him to negotiate, to get deals for himself and his buddies. If you're already in the top 0.001%, what is a recession going to do for you except create assets on the cheap for you to buy up and increase your wealth?
Yep. And of course, that's called populism.
Apparently.
For some.
And by the way, before we get to this ad, just quickly, this AI bubble, the data that we're seeing about how that's going to burst, like the technology sector is basically the only healthcare, for-profit healthcare, and technology is like the only thing that's growing in the United States right now. I guess real estate too, because there's a lot of building happening in places like Texas and stuff. But AI is the is like the center of this technological like expanse. And we're seeing that already these large firms, the adoption rates for AI into their workflow is decreasing and has been over the past few months. And without the gains in the healthcare sector, the Financial Times had this, that the non-farm payroll reports that came out on Friday would have what'd you say?
Non-farm.
Is that what I said? Or I did? Form. Damn it. I'm just reading my bad handwriting. Non-farm payroll reports would have been a loss. So this is not. It's like consumer spending's down, jobs are down, and this one speculative bubble is about to burst because our AI does not have the value that is being portrayed by the markets. It's totally disconnected from reality.
We'll have more to say on this, obviously, in the coming days and probably weeks, maybe months.
Years.
Possibly years. In the meantime, however, I took a little trip this weekend. Went to Pennsylvania, delivered a puppy. And this time of year in particular, very difficult to figure out, what do I need to wear? I'm going to wear a t-shirt, but the temperature is going to change throughout the day. What am I going to wear that's going to keep me warm and cool? You know what it is? It's my Cozy Earth hoodie. It's my favorite piece of clothing that I own. Cozy Earth products bring ultimate comfort that shows up day in, day out. Cozy Earth nailed comfort with their bamboo joggers and their everywhere pant, next level. Now, the bamboo joggers are made of the same stuff as my favorite hoodie. I love my bamboo joggers because it's actually the first pair of joggers I've ever had. Because I thought, like, I'm not the type of person, I don't wear sweats outside. It's not like I'm too, I'm not stylish necessarily, but I'm formal. And but the joggers, and I just feel like I can't put my keys. Yeah, I'm rigid. I'm very particular, and I can't put my keys in a like a pair of sweats. But with these joggers, they're like stable enough that you feel like you're wearing pants, but they're incredibly comfortable, and they look really good. Made with viscose from bamboo, they will be your softest all season staple, along with the hoodie. But I love those joggers. I think I look good in them, and I can use them to play both softball or actually like go to the market. I'm trying to think of like what I do socially, but if you did something social, you could
talk
wear
to the
them.
cashier sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not self-checkout.
How's it doing, guys? And I feel comfortable because I'm in my joggers.
You sound comfortable.
And the Everywhere pant is also the epitome of refined comfort and adaptability. It is the new go-to pant, effortlessly blends breathability and flexibility, allowing you to embrace movement on the go. These are also great. They look great. They stretch. Super comfortable. I get a lot of compliments on my hoodie too, incidentally. I know because my kids try and take it. Thanks to Cozy Earth for sponsoring this episode. Go to CozyEarth.com. Use my code Majority Report for up to 40% off the best pants, joggers, shirts, everything. And if you get a post-purchase survey, tell them you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Built for real life, made to keep up with yours. Cozy Earth. Literally in the middle of that read, I was like, I got to get another sweatshirt. I got to get another hoodie. 40% off.
I know, right?
That's when my ears prick up a little bit. Hey, also, we're doing a little bit of a partnership with a magazine or a website, a periodical I love. We've had Nathan Robinson on this program many times. If you like deep, thoughtful, progressive analysis, and I hope you do, because otherwise, I don't know why you would be listening to this show.
The eye candy.
Exactly. Just curious how many times Sam can say in a sentence. You're going to love the print and digital, or digital for that matter, of Current Affairs magazine. Current Affairs combines intelligent commentary, biting political satire, and really gorgeous artwork to produce one of the country's most elegant and informative magazines. And it's all ad-free. Current Affairs is a fantastic complement to the Majority Report's work. They deliver hard-hitting, totally independent, and entertaining coverage of the most important political, social, and economic issues of our time. Has it been 5 years? Maybe more. Been reading Current Affairs. You should check it out too. And now you can use code Majority Report for 30% off a year on any subscription of your choice. Go to currentaffairs.org/subscribe. Enter the code Majority Report at checkout. This offer expires on Halloween.
It was 10 years, actually.
It's been 10 years?
I know.
Wow.
Makes me feel very old.
Oh, geez. I'm losing my sense of time. Meanwhile, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Sarah Fouts, Associate Professor in the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, author of Rebuilding New Orleans, Immigrant Laborers and Street Food Vendors in the Post-Katrina Era. Katrina was 20 years ago. Oh, geez. All right. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Sarah Fouts, Associate Professor in the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and author of Rebuilding New Orleans, Immigrant Laborers and Street Food Vendors in the Post-Katrina Era. Sarah, welcome to the program. We were just saying at the break, it's been 20 years since Katrina, which was terrifying for me to actually realize it's been that long. it's obviously a good time to look back and see what the implications were. There was a huge concern, some of it realized, that the city was going to be gentrified in many respects. A lot of folks were sent to Houston, were literally put into the metro, whatever the Metro Dome, I think it was, and many of those people never came back. And your book is both timely in the sense that it gives us an opportunity to reflect on this, but also obviously in the context of what's happening with immigration in this country. I don't know if I would describe this necessarily as an ethnography, but it is it's using the stories of individuals to tell sort of some of the dynamics that take place. Let's start with Dennis, who was one of the day laborers who came in, many of whom were from Central America. Let's use Dennis as the way you do in the book to tell us this broader story.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Sam. And thanks to Emma for having me on the show. And yeah, Dennis is a great starting point. I use him as the thread throughout the book to kind of tell this story about immigration, but also kind of labor organizing in the post-Katrina era. And it is wild to think it's been 20 years, but Dennis serves as, he was a day laborer, then he got injured on the work site. He was fighting for his rights for OSHA protections. While he was doing that, he became an organizer with the Workers Center. And so Dennis really kind of was emblematic of this process of organizing and kind of coming from Honduras to first to Tennessee and then to Louisiana for post-Katrina rebuilding, and really kind of worked with day laborers to do know your rights, to understand kind of their and wage theft claims and things like that. But to also build power with the Black workers in the city as well. So I think it's kind of using his story to tell this bigger picture of organizing in that era is really important. And Dennis is back in Honduras and he has a coffee farm. So he's has also gone back, but has siblings that are still in the area. So
do we have a sense of how many folks like Dennis from Central America, originally from Central America, who were in the country either undocumented or within the process of potentially being documented? This was at a time when the Bush administration was attempting to do comprehensive immigration reform and really prevented, in many respects, by their own party, by the sort of conservative element that I think had grown within the Republican Party, that Bush and Karl Rove, I think, underestimated how much of that part of their party had taken over. So I'm curious, if we know the numbers, and particularly relative to how many people were there rebuilding or cleaning up, I guess, in that process.
Right. The immigrant workers made up about 50% of the workers that came in to rebuild. Others were volunteers or local workers or other people brought in. Of that 50%, about 25% were undocumented. I think this is when you see early ICE is kind of a nascent organization, was set up in March 2003. So I think that's really important to think about. So by Katrina, it was just a little over 2 years old. So really thinking about how much it's changed over time and kind of beefed up budget-wise and things like that, which maybe we could talk about in a little bit. But and then also thinking about the Bush administration, like what how they saw kind of this rebuilding, suspending different labor laws like Davis-Bacon, which guarantees a prevailing wage. You see different OSHA suspensions to really expedite workers to come in, but also expedite exploitation and kind of lay the groundwork for a lot of these injustices that took place at that time period. So I do think, it was a time very different than now, where you did see kind of on both sides possible immigration reform at a large scale. But then that, has fallen apart and we don't really see that pathway at all.
So you have this massive portion of the people who come in to clean up after Katrina and to ostensibly rebuild are are immigrants, Central American immigrants, and then you talk about like anything, you can't have an influx of any type of like whatever it is. A lot of New Yorkers move to Florida, and then all of a sudden you start to see more New York Giants posters everywhere, or you go to the sports bar and they're playing the Giants game as much as they are the Dolphins game in certain areas. We start to see like these immigrants. We start to see culture build around them. And you use a guy named Mateo, who, as an example of sort of like the economy that's built around those people who are brought in to sort of help the economy.
Yeah, so Mateo's a great example. I mean, he began as a construction worker, but then saw the need for more street food vendors to sell food to the workers because things like Red Cross and other food services weren't really reaching those communities. And they're working 12-hour days, so they need, this is an issue of food security. So Mateo and his family turned to having food trucks to sell to people or selling like itinerantly on the streets with like tamale vendors and things like that. So you really see this kind of, and I wouldn't say it's a new form of selling food, but there's like informal economies that emerge because they already existed in the city, like historically and even in Black communities. So I think that, kind of understanding the role and the importance of those sort of grassroots food economies in getting people fed in this time when there were systemic failures in different ways of actually getting people fed and having sustainable systems of getting food to places instead of making people come to a park or things like that.
The flip side of that is that when you start to see the street vendors selling the food, suddenly the workers become more visible in terms of a cultural force. And I'm trying to find where I have this in my notes. But at one point, Nagin, the mayor of New Orleans, is like explicit. I think he explicitly said I don't want tacos replacing hush puppies. I can't remember what it was that he said.
The gumbo, yeah.
The gumbo.
Yeah.
And it's almost like all there in that statement there. It's both a sort of a cultural thing. It's also from an economic standpoint. It's also about a fear of a change in the city. The irony, of course, is that there wasn't the same sort of concern that a significant portion of the Black population left New Orleans. They were evacuated, did not have the money to come back, and were going to be replaced by wealthier white people. But there's a concern that there's going to be sort of like a population of Central Americans.
Right. So the fear, yeah. And I'll give Nagin some credit. He said, I don't want the city to be overrun by Mexican workers. But it was a council member, Oliver Thomas, that said, how did the tacos help the gumbo? So it was,
fair.
But it was, but you're still getting that kind of food reference from who's running for mayor's office right now in New Orleans. But yeah, you see food is just very much visible to this day. If you're in New Orleans, you see much more Honduran restaurants or taco trucks and even people sitting outside the grocery stores selling tamales. So it's the way that you could see the visibility of those populations are represented by the foods, right? So thinking about the impact of using food as that lens, how it's going to infiltrate the New Orleans culture and impact it in this ways. And New Orleans culture is so dynamic. Like that's what makes it beautiful. Like from the Vietnamese communities, right? You see how they're kind of this acclaimed immigrant community in the city, but seeing them as like kind of fear mongering around immigrants, but not this like gentrifying class that's bringing in kind of raising levels of housing at the same time of displacement of Black communities because of lack of housing, because of destruction of public housing and things like that. These like policies that have pushed the people who make the gumbos out, and then you're bringing in these kind of gentrifier class that comes in, while vilifying the working class immigrant communities. Yeah, I think that's kind of the point of the book, is to think about how food can, which is, New Orleans is a food city, but how you can think about these different issues through that lens, and how it's actually coming out of politicians' mouths, right, in these different ways.
Is food in this instance, is it a sort of a leading indicator, a lagging indicator, like where it plays off in so many different ways, particularly with a city like New Orleans, but broadly speaking, the food is you can enter into there and have obviously multiple different conversations, but like how quickly was the food the impetus, or was it the excuse, or was it, I mean, surely someone must have been like aware of this dynamic and on both sides of like the desire to have, I mean, you know, these people who come back in, they're rebuilding the city. You could respond to that in two different ways, I guess.
Yeah, well, in 2007 in Jefferson Parish, which is the county around New Orleans, they banned taco trucks. Like there was an outright ban on those types of trucks. So you can really see, and that's where the majority of the Mexican and Central American population lives to this day, is in the suburbs. So you really see this very much racialized ban of taco trucks. So through food, they're using it, you know, they're kind of acting out these words of these politicians to ban, and they're using the food as that way to do that. So when I moved to New Orleans in 2010, and that's when I started, you know, reading about those policies, reading about the different comments, and really thinking about using food as that way to surface these other issues, from bureaucracy that kind of also was used to racial profile folks through allowing these gourmet trucks, these food trucks to come in, but outlawing like taco trailers, which is what most of the immigrants used. So there's on the books to this day a ban against trailers, but you can have, you know, gourmet food trucks. They've really liberalized those policies. So, you know, I think that, you know, as I kept following food in these different ways, and also working with the New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice, kind of seeing on the ground how these everyday experiences through the restaurants, and even the restaurant industry, who's working in the kitchens, right? After Katrina, there was, you know, an increase in the amount of restaurants, even though there's a decrease in population in the city, and who's working in the backs of those restaurants, right? It's oftentimes immigrant workers and also poor and working class Black workers. So really thinking about these spaces as ways to think about labor and labor organizing in the city, I think helped me to surface a lot of these kind of issues of power and things like that.
Let's talk about it in terms of that context of wages, because that dynamic of more restaurants opening with less people, it implies that what you have is a higher concentration of wealth, because, you know, they can go out to eat 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week, or 7 nights a week. So you don't need as many people if the ones you do have are wealthy. Meanwhile, you have a workforce that is perfectly situated to be exploited, because so many of these folks are undocumented or, you know, within that community. Talk about that dynamic.
I think you have a wealthier class, but also you're catering to a tourism economy, right? So they're building, these restaurants are not for the local folks. They're built for a kind of this growth of tourism. And that's how the city was rebuilt, right? You have developers calling it a green banana. You have white developers calling it the city the vision is like a Afro-Caribbean Paris, right? But how do you have, you know, these kind of top-down outsiders kind of imagining these spaces and creating, you know, these restaurants in these neighborhoods that aren't for the local people, right? And I think, you know, the restaurants definitely embody that, and it shows like how much of the city was rebuilt in this way, right? Again, it's called a blank slate, right? And to pave way for these this tourist economy for the, all the Super Bowl that just happened there. Of course, Mardi Gras, carnival celebrations, all the festivals that take place, all the concerts, right? They're paving way for that instead of kind of making, keeping those jobs for local folks, but also making it accessible and equitable for people to be able to come back, there to be enough housing, there to be enough jobs that have good wages for people to come back to. And I think that's why what's kept the population so low and also more kind of upper class of who can afford those housing prices and things like that.
Interesting. And do we have a sense of like what percentage of the population pre-Hurricane Katrina was able to return?
Well, I can't give you the numbers before Katrina were about almost 500,000, and now they're around 375,000. So you still have this decline, and even though who is coming back, right? It is still majority Black city, but much less of the city is Black than it was before. You have from 4% pre-Katrina of Latinx people is now around 9 or 10%. And so you see kind of like who the new demographic, this big shift is pretty drastic, right? And that's not because people just didn't want to return. It's because they couldn't. And it's not because they didn't have, they had access to wealth, but they didn't have access to wealth to be able to rebuild their homes because there was disproportionately benefited white, wealthier neighborhoods than it did in like the Ninth Ward neighborhoods. And then you have, I think housing is central to these processes. And then also kind of union busting and the jobs and kind of low wages have been kept down in these service sector economies. I think that's been a part of it too in that 21st century context.
Talk about El Congreso. This grew out of this dynamic, I guess.
Yeah, so the El Congreso, they were one of three parts of the New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice. So they emerged in like 2006, 2007 to fight for rights for workers. And the Congreso was for immigrant workers who came in, mostly day laborers. So it was the Congress of Day Laborers. And so it was like these 5 different day labor corners that established after Katrina in different places across the city in front of Home Depots and things like that, where workers would congregate. And then Dennis, and I went around with him for about a year to organize at the different work sites. And then leaders of those different day labor corners would come together with their families. And that group from 2000 in a 10-year period grew from about 80 people to around 250 people at regular meetings every Wednesday night with a membership base of around 1,000 people. So you have this massive group of immigrant workers well organized with great organizers and great leaders within the community. And then you had Black workers organized within the same worker center model under Stand with Dignity. And these were Black, poor and working class folks who were displaced because of housing, this public housing being destroyed, but we're trying to fight for those jobs through Section 3 ordinances to be able to maintain some of those jobs. And these are two groups that are usually pitted against each other, right? So you have them really great organizing brought together to fight for kind of rights across the board for immigrant rights, but also for wages, right to remain, right to not be locked out of different jobs because of a felony conviction and things like that. So yeah, and people showing up for each other's campaigns that were at the local level, but also state and federal levels too, fighting in front of the ICE office against deportations under Obama administration. So I think that's what I really wanted to showcase in the book is how these groups came together, these coalitions within the organization, but also across class, race, language barriers, things like that. And I think that's really powerful and kind of can speak to the contemporary moment.
What's been the durability of that coalition?
The Worker Center still exists, but it's in a kind of a different form. I think the El Congreso does not exist anymore, but there are other groups that have emerged out of it, like Unión Migrante, that have really, and a lot of the work that's happening today, and even kind of similar to then, were these kind of reactionary, trying to how do we maintain these rights to stay. And so they don't exist in the same capacities they did 10 years ago, but the Worker Center still exists, and then a lot of different branches exist. And I think, there's a lot more different coalitions in the city, a lot more kind of the unions are coming back in different ways. There's like Step Up, up Louisiana, you have like UTNO, the teachers organization. So you have different groups coming together, and you have other grassroots organizations that are really bringing in climate change into the conversation in ways that the Worker Center didn't. So I think it's, kind of evolved in different ways. There are smaller organizations that are around that are strong. But I feel like at that time period, the Worker Center was really doing something that was unique and powerful under great leadership and really building coalition strength across different organizations.
I am curious as to how much of that period between 2006 and 2016, where it feels like ICE was used as sort of like a way to calibrate how much of the immigrant population the city wanted there. Like, we need to have just enough so that they can do the work that we need to have done, but not so much that they become a political force. Is my sense of that correct? And how much of that was a model for the way that ICE operates today?
I think, two-part. I think that the Congreso was a political force. I would argue they were sitting at the table with the Chief Harrison to do the consent decree. They were at the table, undocumented immigrants were at the table doing a lot of that kind of debates to rebuild policy. They fought against the local sheriff's office, Sheriff Gussman, there were ICE holds that were under 287G, and got his office to stop collaborating with ICE under those policies, so which were voluntary, and then got him to end these holds that were happening that were kind of constitutional crises where he was holding people longer than the 48-hour period. So I think in some ways that their impact in shaping policy, they ended a big, and this is Obama time period, ended the carry raids, which was the Criminal Alien Removal Initiative, which was this major deportation, kind of similar to what's happening now, these raids that were workplace raids, church raids, and they were able to kind of intercept the email that kind of divulged that was happening. But I think the difference is the accountability, right? Is, back then you have like the racial profiling, we could call that out. Now we're getting, the Fourth Amendment.
The administration's in front of the Supreme Court basically saying, let us please racially profile, and there's reason to believe they're going to.
They just did with LA. Yeah, I just checked my
30 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah. 30 minutes ago?
Yeah,
30 minutes ago.
Or an hour ago, yeah.
I just, I mean, for people to be clear on this, a federal judge had basically said ICE cannot operate by looking at the color of someone's skin, seeing that they may have a Spanish accent or that they're working like as a gardener, and decide we're just going to roll up on that person because that's some type of evidence that they may be an undocumented immigrant. And the Trump administration explicitly went to the Supreme Court and said, yeah, we want to be able to basically racially profile. And I guess 30 minutes ago, the Supreme Court's
6-3.
Unbelievable.
And I would imagine no decision written, right? Just a shadow docket would be my guess. Although I don't know, maybe there is actually a decision
from Sotomayor. I know that.
Sotomayor wrote a dissent. Yeah.
There's dissents. Well, I guess Kavanaugh has concurring opinion, so there may actually have written as to why it is legal to racially profile, essentially, when you're looking for immigrants. Well,
yeah.
That's that. Things are moving quickly. So, where are we today in terms of like New Orleans, and what, from the perspective of, I mean, I would imagine if this was to happen to New Orleans again, it would be a very different story about the capacity to rebuild, because I would imagine that those people who came from all over the country to help rebuild New Orleans would be like, I'm not going anywhere near there. The whole thing is just some type of like honeypot for ICE at this point. But where, from New Orleans' perspective, like where is it relative to the fears that people had about this city becoming just either a Disney World or a place for wealthy people? And then I guess, where is it in terms of like how replicable these dynamics can be because of everything that's happened really over the course of like the past eight months?
Right. And I mean, a lot of the critiques of Katrina are about FEMA, but now, but it's about not about like the necessity for FEMA, but the lack of corruption within that context. Right. And so during Katrina's, almost $1 billion were just kind of lost, went wasted. But now you just have like this dissolution of FEMA as in the most dire of times, across, when we're getting floods and hurricanes affecting Appalachia. I think, that's what's really frightening. And I think what we have in terms of ICE is, a friend called ICE now, like as Sheriff Arpaio of Arizona on steroids, right? So it's like this, like exactly what we're just hearing from this decision from the Supreme Court. And you also have technology being used in ways that it was only 10 years ago, it was being kind of developed, like Palantir, all of Peter Thiel stuff, all the surveillance used to face surveillance and things like that. I think that's what's also really scary, is the ways in which those types of technologies are able to really kind of make it even harder for not just immigrant communities, any communities, especially communities of color, that are kind of subjected to these types of surveillance in these different ways. So I think that's like, and then this, I think the budget of ICE is 3 times what it was and is growing in these jobs. Like, I think that's what's also frightening. In terms, I think with, hurricanes are getting worse, and I think we're not really, there is, I think, a push on the city level. I have friends who work in kind of disaster related fields at the city of New Orleans who are really kind of being thoughtful of these processes. But a lot of, the money, the funding, the things like that will be so necessary in those times aren't there. And, even under Bush, during Katrina, you had Michael Brown, who was the FEMA director. He had no experience in disaster management, right? And think about the people that Trump's putting in place now are people with no experience, or his cronies who he's just trying to empower or do a favor because whatever reason. So I think those are the things that are we've always had a lack, people in place that aren't trained for those positions. But at this point, not only is it we're moving funding for budget cuts or for tax cuts for billionaires, but we are also moving funding that is public sector in ways that help people, not in ways that just are public sector in terms of ICE or policing, in ways that threaten people. So I think that's what's frightening, and that's not a positive, happy messaging at all. But
2 other things that occurred to me. Like, my understanding is, are there even any public schools left now in New Orleans? I mean, it's all charter, right? And they're all private charter.
Exactly. Yeah. But they have, I will say, there's great, like, and that was a big issue with Katrina. So those were great jobs, right, for people from New Orleans. And then they completely got displaced. The union was busted or kind of dismantled. But there has been a strong movement with UTNO. And there's a long history of strong teacher organizing in that city. And I think those teacher organizing groups are really kind of coming together to get within the charter school systems. But yeah, the public schools they're completely gone.
I mean, and one of the things I recall too is that early in the wake of the hurricane, I don't know if they were called Blackwater at the time or Jay, but mercenaries were sent down there to basically take over control of the city. I mean, all of the worst elements of this, God forbid there's some type of replication in terms of a natural disaster. All of the worst elements of it seem like have arrayed themselves in this administration, almost to be deployed less as like almost by design in this instance. Like, I think like the sending in Jay or whatever it was at that time, Blackwater, was because they had no idea what to do. I mean, They had no idea what to do leading up to it. They had no idea what to do afterwards. They were fortunate to be able to get 45% of its workforce, 50% of its workforce from immigrants. That would not happen today. I mean, what, like, it's sort of hard to imagine what would happen in there other than some billionaire saying, like, okay, this new city is going to be, Muskville, and otherwise nothing's going to happen. Right? Like, I mean,
Right.
they're like, if New Orleans was to suffer a Katrina today, same type of thing. I know that's impossible, but I'm saying it's something similar. It seems to me like there is everything stops at one point. Like, it's just going to be a mess. Nobody's coming in to clean up the moldy ruins. Nobody's going to do this. And it puts a billionaire in the position of being able to say, like, I'm going to do this. I mean, we almost saw this with wildfires out in California, in LA. But there's a robust enough sort of like state infrastructure. But in one of these red states where none of that infrastructure exists, it seems to me that it is completely vulnerable to, like, almost being fully privatized.
Yeah, and I think those are, the failures of 2005 and that recovery period, right? That we're like, these are failures. You can name these, kind of the ways in which this privatization really kind of impacted negatively these communities and the city as a whole. And now those politics are kind of like a Tuesday, right? It's how it's kind of what we're the way we operate. Not we, but like the systems that we're moving toward. So yeah, I think you're completely right, and I think they'll say it's the failure of the city, right? They'll blame the local people instead of understanding kind of this divestment, these ways in which, like, the public housing, the things that people who make that city and those places so rich and so important. And I think that, they'll shift the blame like they do with public education, right? They'll say, well, the schools are failing, but actually this divestment that's been happening for 40 years is the problem, right? It's not the schools. It's like this lack of investment. Yeah. And I think, and then what you do have, you have like great local leadership that is there, but what you have is like what happened in Katrina is these no contract bids that come in, like for Katrina, it was like Halliburton and these mercenaries that are coming in and doing these top down, wasting money, right? It's going to bloated contracts. It's a lot of wage stuff, and they're not doing their job because they don't know. And you have these local organizations that are set to do it, but they're being displaced. They're pushed out in different ways. When there is, I think the answer for me is like the city organizing, which is always the case. It best, but then you're also impacted in Louisiana right now with the Landry administration, right? That is creating this kind of detention center mecca for immigrant, whatever Trump says, Landry does, and they're making Angola this immigrant lockdown, Angola prison. So, I think it's really kind of scary, but I do think that there are ways in which the city and its people know what's best, but they're not being listened to, or they're being erased in these different ways that's quite frightening.
Can you talk briefly about that Angola story? I feel like it's not getting too much attention, but this is a notorious prison in Louisiana that the very Trumpy governor is kind of, working with Trump to turn into an immigrant detention facility. It's infamous for its exploitative labor practices, abusive treatment of prisoners, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's on a former plantation in kind of probably about 3 hours outside of New Orleans, Angola Penitentiary, and they're building kind of this and there's already multiple detention centers in Louisiana, but using Angola as this kind of like also a space to hold, I think 400 immigrants is how much the capacity it is, but just kind of the symbol of using that prison that's so has such a troubled history in so many ways that you explained, Emma. And it's just Landry cowering too, and they were going to name it after Landry. I'm not sure where that is right now, but these are ways in which they're really trying to double down in these ways of being, using Louisiana as this anti-immigrant space. But New Orleans is this kind of stronghold in these different ways that I think is really important to to the immigrant communities that are there.
I feel like maybe it was 25 years ago, there was a documentary about Angola, which is worth seeing, just to give you a notion of like what the history of that prison is. I mean, it was...
I mean, do they still do that kind of display of like the rodeo where people come and like bet on them?
Yeah, that still exists, which is, and it's a very problematic, to say the least, prison. It still exists, and there's not much.
Well, Sarah Fouts, New Orleans is just there's so many stories within the recovery of New Orleans, and frankly, the disaster that took place in New Orleans relative to what happens when you have an agency that has been completely dismantled. That is insightful for where we are today, and perhaps, maybe sadly, in some respects, predictive of what we can't say for sure, but certainly of something that could happen. Well, not just during this administration. I think their failures are going to resonate for a long time. But Sarah Fouts, the book is Rebuilding New Orleans, Immigrant Laborers and Street Food Vendors in the Post-Katrina Era. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Sarah Fouts, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half.
Yeah, I mean, I just was reminded that Angola story. I had forgotten about that, but yeah, basically they pay the prisoners, the inmates there, such low wages that I guess once a year or something like that, they have a rodeo where they can win hundreds of dollars, which is like a lot in terms of prison rations. And people from all around the state come and gamble on them, and it's like a gladiator type situation that happens as a tradition that started in like the 60s at this particular prison in Louisiana.
Louisiana's, I mean, I love New Orleans, crazy state, like historically speaking.
Yep.
In terms of like the types of political machines that have been down there. Like they're funded by a state lottery for at least, I don't know if that's still going on, but for a huge part of the history, like really bizarre governance down there.
And oil money just soaking the whole state and creating like areas of the state that are entirely uninhabitable, basically, or when you do live there, you're likely to get cancer.
You don't want Cancer Alley to be in your state.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. It's just like, we'll have fun in the fun half. We're determined.
Mm-hmm.
Jointhemajorityreport.com.
I think it's good.
You can help this show survive and thrive. And then you get the fun half, and you can IM us. And also enjoy justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee. Out of, not in Green Bay, but in Madison, Wisconsin. Co-op there, great politics, great coffee. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Matt, Left Reckoning.
Yeah, we had a good Sunday show, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Sunday show for patrons talking about an insane story out of Wired about a Silicon Valley surrogacy story, which is sort of, insane. And then also talking about this blowing up a Venezuelan boat that just, they're drug dealers, terrorists, both of them at the same time, shoot a missile. Bad sort of trajectory we're on in this country in terms of how we're acting out as a nation. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
I'm just reading into, I'll just read the first paragraph for this breakdown of this, the LA Times. Supreme Court ruled on Monday for the Trump administration and agreed U.S. immigration agents may stop and detain anyone they suspect is in the U.S. illegally based on little more than working at a car wash, speaking Spanish, or having brown skin. You know, sometimes you worry that you are a little bit hyperbolic when you haven't seen a ruling and make an assessment, and then that's what it is. It is full on racial profiling, and my understanding is it's an emergency appeal, and I don't know if that means that it is a lifting of the judge's order on a temporary basis.
It seems like it's like an injunction that they're repealing.
It's a repeal of an injunction or a temporary order, which means that the case continues. But the Supreme Court has done this multiple times now. The implication is that if you don't allow ICE to racially profile, they will be irrecoverably harmed. And I mean, that's why you lift an appeal, or you issue an appeal. I should say you lift an injunction or an order, or you repeal one. It will, the existence or the absence of one will cause irreparable harm.
Irrevocable.
Thank you. Irrevocable harm. I'm having a stroke. Now what's going to happen is, as you go about your day in California, if you're brown, that was on you, man.
I mean, they were already doing this, but now there's no recourse for clear racial profiling, right?
That's right. I mean, they were doing this. That's why the case was brought.
Yeah.
But now it's going to be policy, stated policy.
Where does this, we have to still read like what the Supreme Court decision says, but does this open the door for explicit usage of racial profiling in contexts that are not immigration related?
I mean,
like say,
this is
going
what
neighborhood?
Kavanaugh says, and federal law says immigration officers may, quote, briefly detain an individual for questioning if they have a, quote, reasonable suspicion based on specific articulable facts that the person being questioned is an alien illegally in the United States.
I feel like Tom Homan said explicitly that on a hit, articulable.
Well, yeah, but there used to be articulable facts that were not relevant as to creating a reasonable suspicion. In this instance, it's going to be like, well, he was brown. Well, he was speaking Spanish. Well, he was doing a job that supposedly Americans won't do. And this is the emergency docket. This is the shadow docket. So it very little, I mean, this is the the implications of the Supreme Court.
I mean, it's like a Dred Scott era a bit, right? I mean, like this is the kind of decision that will be a stain on our history, and we're living through it.
Yep. Texas left. Is this just for California? Well, it's specifically the case is California, but I don't see why, if it was brought up, Los Angeles, sorry, why, if it was brought up, you know, presumably ICE is going to use this exact same thing in Chicago, in whatever, you know, name the locality.
Precedent's been set.
And Chicago ACLU will attempt to enjoin them from using this in a court, and the court, that federal court, could say, "Oh, we're not going to abide by that ruling because it was specifically to LA," but it's unlikely. And in the event they did that, the Supreme Court would probably say, like, you're purposely ignoring our rulings. Supreme Court just did do that, actually. I can't remember what the case is now off the top of my head. One of the judges clapped back and said, it's not our intention to do that, but when you make all these rulings, that are clearly against precedent and creating new law, and you have no explanation for it, we're a little bit incapable of following what you consider to be precedent. But more on that at a different time. Folks, Left Reckoning, did you already say it? I'm losing it. See you in the fun half.